Hello, everybody, and welcome to our new show, The Real Estate and Mortgage Outlook. The team here at All In Mortgage, we are super excited to launch this new show. It's really about education, helping our real estate agents with information, helping our home buyers, homeowners with education, to power them with information to make expert decisions. George, Cheryl, Rebecca, Jennifer, Brian, and I are excited to launch this show, getting ready to interview Nadia Evangelou. She is the Senior Economist and Director of Forecasting at the National Association of Realtors. We're going to be talking about a lot of things, and I think here in Delaware it's freezing cold. We're expecting what they call a snowstorm, snow bomb, or whatever they want to call it. I feel like a lot of people think the real estate and mortgage market right now is like a big winter storm, or a cluster in a way, because mortgage rates have been rising in the last 45 days to pre-pandemic levels. Home ownership, there's a lot of homes for sale, however, inventory is still low. So Nadia and I are going to talk about that, what that really means with interest rates rising. What does it mean for the outlook on the housing market? Because obviously interest rates, they're going to have to rise to quell inflation, because all kinds of prices have gone up, as everybody can see and look at the store and shelves. So Nadia and I are going to talk about that. We're going to have a great conversation. We're going to educate you. We're super excited. Let's go. All right, everybody, thank you so much for watching. We appreciate it. We got a very special guest here with our show, Nadia Evangelou. She is the Senior Economist and Director of Forecasting for the National Association of Realtors. Nadia, thank you so much for agreeing to come on. I really appreciate this.
Thank you, Joe. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Yes, it's awesome. A lot has changed in the last couple months. It's really amazing to see the market and things change. So I know we have some home sales data numbers that have just been coming out last few months. So how are things looking across the country right now?
Sure. Yeah. 2021 was actually the best year, for the real estate market in the last 15 years, since 2006. Home purchases surged over the past year, in an abnormal way. Even though home prices hit record highs, eroding affordability, housing market outperformed. And the main driver of this booming housing market was the record low mortgage rates.
Yes.
In fact, if you remember, a year ago, mortgage rates reached the latest record low in their history. In the first week of 2021,
right?
The 30-year fixed mortgage rate was about 2.65% compared to 8%, which is the historical
right
average rate. And everybody knows that the interest rate on a mortgage has a direct impact on the size of a mortgage payment. Higher rates increase mortgage payments, while higher rates typically reduce the amount of money that people can borrow. That's millions of people rushed to benefit from these low rates, pushing up activity in the real estate market. And furthermore, pent-up demand and lifestyle shifts during the pandemic were some other drivers of the housing market. While remote work policy is still in place for millions of people, and it's expected to be even after the end of the pandemic, people wanted to move to a bigger home.
Right.
So there is plenty of space for them to work and their kids to play. Nevertheless, what we see now, there are signs of a more normal and predictable real estate market ahead. And this is what we want to see, a more normal market. Market will likely settle down, but again, it will remain above pre-pandemic levels. As
right.
You have already noticed, mortgage rates are going up, especially since the beginning of the new year. And we actually expect rates to rise even further. Thus, while the outlook for mortgage rates is for even higher rates, we
right.
also expect more homes to enter the market. We actually currently building about 500,000 more homes than pre-pandemic, compared to 2019. Yeah, and this is great news. That with higher mortgage rates and more housing supply on the horizon, then the intense multiple offers will likely ease. But again, mortgage rates will remain low, but not as low as they were like last year.
Right.
So housing market will continue to outperform like compared to pre-pandemic. We estimate about like, just to give you an idea, about like 5.9 million homes to be sold like in 2022.
Wow.
And actually this is still like a 10% like increase compared to pre-pandemic, compared to 2019.
Right, which is great. And that's, I think, the biggest thing. Like, it's funny how you mentioned the low rates. I mean, I still couldn't believe 15-year, seeing 1.75 at one point. It just blew my mind, and I couldn't believe it. And also too, I mean, the biggest thing is just, people just overbidding on homes right now, and people just getting frustrated with the market because there's just the lack of inventory out there. And hopefully this will start to turn around a little bit. We have a lot of people waiting. They're just like, I want to get in my home, and it's just tough right now still.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So as far as like, let's say where our areas at, like Pennsylvania, Delaware, and obviously we have a lot of people in Florida that have second homes. Are there any specific trends you're seeing in those areas right now? Is there a little bit more accelerated growth in the housing market kind of in the Northeast and Florida, or is it still kind of on average with the nation, I guess?
Yeah, so housing market actually outperformed in all these three states like last year, like while millions of people are continue to work like remotely, these areas had also like an influx of migrants like during the pandemic, like increasing demand even further. Like for instance, Florida and Pennsylvania are among the most favored, or to say better, the most favored destinations for baby boomers.
Right.
So with record high like number of resignations, as it's called, the Great Resignation, like many people decided to retire earlier and move to their retirement destination. Thus, due to high demand and like limited inventory, these states experience like double-digit like home appreciation. Like for instance, the typical house like appreciate about 20% in Florida and 15% in Delaware and about like 14% like in Pennsylvania.
Wow.
However, inventory continues to be the main like challenge in these markets. It dropped like significantly in 2021. For instance, in Florida, active listings dropped by 50%, which means that there are currently like half of the homes for sale that they were like a year earlier.
Wow.
That makes it like even more difficult for buyers to find a home to purchase. However, the good news that, as we mentioned, construction is picking up nationwide. We're being about 35% like more than pre-pandemic. In Florida, single family building permits like rose about 50%, so it's more than the national level. In Delaware, about 35%, and in Pennsylvania, about like 45%, about like 50% too. Thus, more homes are expected like to enter the market, like easing the current like housing shortage that we have.
Right. I guess with the Fed, tightening the rates and the policy and things like that, we'll see inflation come down. So that should help bring some costs down. Because I remember, this was a year ago, lumber costs were like way up, and so many people were looking at building homes, and they just were like, no, it's not going to work. It's not going to make sense for us. And a lot of builders stayed off. So hopefully we'll see that trend pick up this year. It sounds like, which is great.
Yeah. This is what we expect. So we're going to have like more homes.
Great. That's awesome.
Some of the supply chain disruptions like will ease. This is what we expect as well, like later in the 2022, like to see like less like disruptions, like supply disruptions. So that could help the construction more.
Right. Gotcha. One of the things that, we're definitely seeing out there is a lot more of self-employed people. I know USA Today did an article a few months ago. They called it the Great Resignation, where about 3% of the workforce left their positions. This is kind of like November 2021. A lot of the people we see out there, they're starting to do self-employed. Like I have a lot of nurse friends who basically are starting their own agency and things like that. So we're definitely seeing more Americans, start their own businesses. Do you see any danger in that with this trend of being self-employed for people buying homes? Because obviously, as the guidelines say, you typically need 2 years self-employed, and a lot of people forget that. And we try to coach them and educate them, but a lot of people I come across now are very self-employed, and there are programs out there for them, but to get into really the conventional and FHA and VA and the traditional programs, it's hard to do.
Yeah, indeed. Like Americans have been leaving their jobs like in record high numbers and switching to self-employment as like consultants, like retailers and small business like owners during the pandemic. And according to the data, the number of like non-corporate like self-employed workers have risen like about like 500,000, like 500,000 like since the start of the pandemic.
Wow.
And this is a very big like increase, like 500,000 people. Meanwhile, while most of the self-employed are generally men, another trend that we see is that women outpaced men in business formations like during the pandemic.
Wow.
And according to a LinkedIn like analysis of user profiles, like enterprises founded like by women have grown about like 30%, like about like 27%,
Wow.
while those founded like by men have grown like 17% since the pandemic like started. But why like more and more like people are become self-employed? So we need to think about that. Like
Sure.
we see that the pandemic like pushed many people to reconsider their career goals, like flexibility of type of work seems to be one of the main reasons, and especially many like working mothers. So we see that's the reason we see like more women as well, like decided to switch to self-employment as both like schools and childcare like options like were closed. So, and some other like reasons can be like some the growing fears among employees like returning to the office amid like ongoing pandemic, like with Omicron variant as well, or the stress of the pandemic.
Sure.
And we also need to see like who are these people and how many of them like are homeowners, just to get an idea like if they have any issues. According to the census, like in 2020, we see that about 9% of the US like households were headed by a self-employed like person.
Wow.
And while annual incomes for self-employed households have been like and remain like higher than salaried households, self-employed households have had like a higher homeownership rate. Like in 2020, their homeownership rate was about 72% compared to 65, which was the overall like homeownership rate. Although like their homeownership rate declined compared to previous years. So like back in 2001, 2007, it was much higher. It's still higher than the rate like for salaried households. Then looking at the financing, we see that only 60% of these owners finance their home purchase compared to 70%, which is the share of salaried people who have a mortgage. And then looking at the recent buyers, those who purchased their home like in 2020, we see that the gap between self-employed and salaried employees is even bigger, like 66% for self-employed compared to 80%. That's indeed, according to the data, it seems that financing is not so accessible like for self-employed. And Joe, as you already mentioned, most mortgage lenders require at least like 2 years of steady self-employment before you can qualify like for a home loan. However, there are exceptions. This is what there are exceptions to the 2-year rule. Like you might qualify with just 1 year, for example, of self-employment if you can show, for example, a 2-year track record in a similar line of work. So buying a home or refinancing, like when you're like self-employed, might not be as difficult as some people like think. Like remember that self-employed like borrowers have access, as you mentioned, to the same mortgage programs and the same like low rates as other borrowers like in the market. And there are even like programs specifically for them. That I will advise them to get like their paperwork like ready, and also remember that lenders will look at their net compensation, like not the gross, because sometimes they get confused. So they need to get like ready to know if they are like qualified, if they can do it, and that means like that lenders are going to want to see, like, especially like for the compensation about to see what they have like made after taxes expenses. So they have to have a good idea of their expenses and the income just to see, to evaluate if they can do it and just prepare like for and get ready for the paperwork. So
No, you're absolutely right. I definitely think there's a lot more, a lot more paperwork because like you have P&Ls and things like that. You'll need an accountant to handle some things, but I do think you bring up a really great point where it's not as hard as in the past. And I think there's that misconception out there. A lot of people feel that like, oh, I'm self-employed, I know I need 2 years. And I said, well, there are some exceptions. You just got to find some right lenders and really do your research. But as you bring up too, you really got to have all your paperwork together, have tax returns, everything done correctly, filed, in sync. So that way you get the big picture, because if you start having piecemealed it or pieces together, it's tough to really put that big picture together. And I think that's what makes it tougher when they don't have it all together. So
Yeah, and if you have like, I think when you do your own business, I'm like, I don't think you have so much time that same year to
Right.
look for a house. So you're almost there. Like if you have like the 2 years, or you have at least 1 year self-employed, then that's even like easier to be qualified. So yeah, I don't think that there's any danger, like serious dangers in that.
Good. Yeah, that's good. And yeah, I think we're going to see that trend grow tremendously in the next year or so. It's funny, everybody talks like, yeah, I want to do this, I want to do that. I'm like, great. I think it's a great time to do it. If you can afford it and you can budget it, go do it. So for sure.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about the last topic, I think, which is kind of the most important thing, the interest rates. Everybody always gets freaked out when there's interest rates. So obviously they've gone up like in the last 45, 50 days. You know, we've seen the 10-year treasury be back to pre-pandemic levels. I think it's twofold for me. I mean, I know, you know, because of inflation, the Fed's got to raise rates. That's obviously given. I understand that. I think a lot of the general public don't really understand that. And you could see it because people say, well, you know, right now I had 3.5 3 months ago. Now it's 4% on a 30-year, let's say, or 3.7, 3.8. I'm just going to, you know, get out of the market. So do you think the Fed's really going to raise rates? I know they talked about 3 times. I heard 4. You think it's going to be that aggressive for sure? And then also too, do you think it might cool the housing market a little bit? And the reason I ask that is because a lot of the feedback I see is people say, well, you know, yeah, the rates are going up a little bit. It might not be able to afford it. And we coach people and educate people as best we can, but there's always that stigma. Rates go up. Oh, I got to stay away and I'm just going to wait it out a little bit. So do you see that as a danger?
Yeah. So indeed, the 10-year treasury yield like reached nearly 1.9% like last week. And that was the highest like level since January 2020.
Right.
And it seems that investors are not like only concerned about high inflation, but also about how many times, as you mentioned, like the Fed will raise interest rates like during the year. Actually, according to Fed's meeting this week, like yesterday, they concluded like although they kept like interest rates unchanged, they announced that their rate hike may be coming like in March. While we don't know yet if it will be like 3 or 4 hikes like in 2022, this increase of the short-term interest rates will also affect consumers.
Right.
But because I received this question like many times, let me first clarify that the Fed doesn't set mortgage rates.
Right.
So short-term interest rates that the Fed will likely raise in March is the rate at which banks borrow and lend to one another. While this is not like the rent that consumers pay, a higher rate like for banks tends to make borrowing like more expensive for consumers, like eventually like affecting like long-term interest rates, such as like the 10-year treasury bond.
Right.
And as mortgage rates typically follow the trend of the 10-year treasury yield, the rate on the convention like 30-year fix, the convention 30-year mortgage also tends to rise. Thus, the Fed's actions have a ripple effect. And keep in mind that the Fed's ultimate goal is to control like elevate inflation by slowing down consumption. This is the main goal of this Fed's policy. Also have in mind that if the Fed will not raise the interest rates, inflation will continue to be elevated. And higher inflation also results to higher mortgage rates. And why? Like it's simple, like mortgage rates are tied with the bond market, and mortgage rates like behave just like bonds. For example, like investors purchase like mortgage-backed securities and profit from the interest paid on them. When inflation like rises and purchasing power like falls, like interest rates must also rise to keep like investors interested. And the same happens like also to treasuries, like yields rise in order to account for inflation. So although mortgage rates, and we need to have this in mind, mortgage rates are higher than a year earlier, they're still near historic lows. As we mentioned, like it's about like 8% the historic average. While, and it's much higher. So while mortgage rates will likely rise even after, even further, like later this year, as the Fed like will raise interest rates, this increase in mortgage rates will also like be mitigated by lower inflation. Thus, what we forecast is that mortgage rates to average about like 3.9% at the end of 2022. And so of course, they're like higher. On the other hand, we have high demand. We have so
Right.
many like millennials. They're at the point that they get married and then
Right.
they want to raise the kids in a safe
Right.
and stable environment. So
Right.
that's the reason. Okay, we are going to have higher. Of course, we are going to see some impact on the home buying activity. But again, the past year was like home sales increase in the abnormal way. So we
Gotcha.
are going to be above the pre-pandemic level. So
Right.
again, like housing market will outperform, but probably not as it did like last year.
Gotcha. No, that's great. And we try to educate people as best we can. Say, look, rates are still at historic lows. You still have some great options and some great buying power. And with inflation starting to come down, costs are going to come down a little bit too. You'll probably see a little bit of cool off in the appraised value. It's not a lot, but it'll start to kind of level a little bit. And that's where we try to coach and educate people. But you still have that stigma of people saying, oh, rates are going up, so I'm out at this point. So is there any way, or do you see those trends too, like a pulse of people saying that? And is there anything else that we can do to kind of help educate people on where things are?
I don't think there's any reason for them to wait. I'm like the horizon, and I think this is what they hear, like that rates will go higher, they will be higher.
Right.
Maybe not much higher, but I'm like, again, they will be higher. So I don't think that there's any reason for them to wait, but they have to be financially like ready,
Exactly.
stable, and to have a stable employment, of course. So I think the only way how we can make like home buyers not to be panic. I think they know already, like the news like putting out there, like okay, that and the experts like putting out there that they will be higher. I think they know that they should not wait, and this is what we saw. Like the previous week, the mortgage applications were like very high, like they increased. This week, no, but we saw that they rushed to go and like buy homes while the mortgage rates were like lower. So I think they know already what's going to happen like later. So, and again, demand will remain like very high because millennials are the largest cohort of the home buyers, and we see
great point.
they will keep like buying homes because they are the states that they want to raise the families.
And that's what we see too. We see a lot of millennials coming in right now looking, and they're eager to get in the first-time home buyer programs, and they're just so eager to get in there. And they do have that question too. And we even say, look, right now, if you were looking at 3.5 a few weeks ago, now it's 3.9. Difference in a payment might be $40-50 a month. It's really not that bad. It's not a huge thing. I think people think it's a couple $100, and it's not too bad. So I think we just got to keep the
and if it's like for 2022, like less than 4%, again, it's very low. This is what like comparable to the historical average. I'm like they're very low.
Well, this has been awesome, Nadia. I really appreciate you taking the time to go over some trends and data that helps our realtor friends as well as home buyers out there, and even just to talk about the interest rates. That's always a big question for everybody. So we really appreciate your time today, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Great. Nadia Evangelou, everybody. Thank you again, Nadia.
What did you think? Was that not an awesome discussion to go over real estate trends and, of course, interest rates? I definitely wanted to bring that topic up. But I think NAR is spot on, and thank you, Nadia, for joining us today. They're spot on with their forecasting, and they have been for many years. They're the best at what they do. And I definitely see the housing market ticking up a little bit. More inventory is going to come on. We have seen some more houses come on, even though it's lagged a little bit. Got to remember, we're here in the winter right now, so this is definitely a slow time, but I think it's going to pick up in the spring, and it's going to be a busy market. Maybe not necessarily as busy in the past, but it is going to pick up. And I think one of the great thing is we talked about interest rates, and it was great for her to clarify that the Fed does not set the mortgage rates. That's what we want to educate people on. The Fed sets, the bank rates where banks can lend and borrow from each other. But obviously, when rates go up, the cost of borrowing does go up. But if you think about it, as we discussed, if you're at a 30-year fixed 3.5 and now rates are at 3.7, 3.8, maybe 3.9 by the end of this year, potentially, as she's saying, maybe that's $40 or $50 more a month in payments. It's really not a lot in the grand scheme of things. Over time, maybe, but again, rates are cyclical. They go up and down. And also, too, what I really wanted to talk about was, is the Fed being too aggressive with raising the rates? I think they might be a little too aggressive, but I know they're going to monitor things. But if you think about it, the economy's been growing the last quarter 6.9%, and inflation's well over 2% now. So something has to be done, because if you have low interest rates, costs are going to continue to rise. And we've all seen lumber costs go up. Look at the pump. We've all been there where gas prices are going up. You look at the supermarket store shelves. Look at the meats. Look at everything, is fruits and vegetables. The cost of everything's going up right now. So the Fed has to do something, because otherwise the economy is going to crash. Now, it could happen if they raise rates. It could halt the economy as well too, but hopefully they'll monitor as they have been. Maybe they dial it back a little bit, but again, rates are still at historic lows. That's what everybody has to remember here. We can't panic and can't freak out over this. Yes, they are going up. Yes, the cost is going up, but you can't have both. You can't have low interest rates and you can't have low cost of everything. It's one or the other. So the cost of goods hopefully comes down a little bit here. We'll see that trickle down over the next couple months, and we'll continue to monitor. But leave us your feedback here. We're super excited for this video series to really help educate all of you and give you the information you need to make smart decisions in the real estate and mortgage market. Thanks for watching, everybody. Take care.